Hello, and thank you for tuning in today to explore how public sector transport strategies can help the UK to achieve its carbon net zero targets. The backdrop to this for the transport sector is the publication of the government's Decarbonising Transport Plan in summer 2021, which focuses on achieving cleaner air quality within our communities in order to make a positive impact on our quality of life. It sets out the ambition to decarbonise all modes of domestic transport by 2050, including a delivery plan to transition to zero-emission cars and vans by 2035. To highlight their ambition, the government has also made a commitment to electrify its entire car and van fleet by 2027. Transport is the largest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the UK, and over 75% of all local authorities have declared a climate emergency. As such, a public sector organisation's fleet and transport policies provide a key opportunity to reduce emissions, improve air quality, and make a huge positive impact as the public sector builds back greener. To discuss how this can be realised, we have today an expert panel to offer insight across policy, support structures, and commercial options available to fleets. We have Tammy Carter, who heads up the fleet category within Crown Commercial Service, Aaron Berry, Deputy Head of Energy and Infrastructure at the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, and also James Brown, Fleet Support Manager at the Energy Saving Trust. Tammy, I'll come to you first. In November 2020, the Prime Minister put the UK on course to be the fastest nation in the G7 to decarbonise cars and vans, announcing that all new petrol and diesel cars and vans will be phased out by 2030. What opportunity does the public sector have to lead the way in this transition?
Thanks, Kim. I think the public sector's got a great opportunity to lead the way, and we're really seeing a big shift away from ICE vehicles already. Over the last 12 months, around 40% of all the new vehicle registrations via the CCS agreements are being ultra-low emission or zero emission vehicles. And to put this into perspective a little bit, 5 years ago, that figure was less than 1% being electric and only 4% that were hybrid. So we're seeing some real progress being made already. And I think this can only be boosted in light of the announcements we've seen this week around the government setting out its net zero strategy and the commitment for more investment and funding for electric vehicles and infrastructure. All of which is great news. Having said that, however, I do feel this is a great opportunity for the public sector to step up this transition and really lead the way. Public sector as a whole, from local authorities, health, education sectors through to central government, to name just a few, have got a combined voice and the purchasing power to drive our transition to net zero and really start to deliver change. To achieve this, however, we're going to have to see more collaboration and alignment of strategies, not only between the different organisations and the sectors starting to work together, but it's really important that they start to work closer internally. So bringing fleet operations, commercial, sustainability and estate teams together with that common purpose. I also think that collaboration across the public sector is a great opportunity in respect to the vehicle charging infrastructure to ensure that planning and installations are not viewed in isolation, but consideration is given to the opportunities of sharing charging sites within local areas, a view to drive efficiencies, but also it can speed up that ability to make that transition to electric across those organisations. Alongside the consideration for the work-based charging, I do think that the public sector also has a key part to play in the growth of the charging infrastructure for public access. So, for example, hospitals, doctors' surgeries, education, public car parks, all of these are going to help with the growing number of zero-emission vehicles on our roads in general and increase that confidence and help the public and the nation as a whole to make that switch. So, yes, Kim, I do think the public sector has an opportunity to lead the way here.
I think that's a good point at which to come to James. James, thinking about your experience within the Energy Saving Trust, where should a public sector organisation start when setting out to decarbonise their fleet, would you say?
Well, Kim, most of the public sector fleets I've come across have already made some small tentative steps on the journey to decarbonisation, whether that's through having some small low mileage electric vans or eco driver training or other methods. However, To take things forward, in my experience, most public sector fleets could do data management a lot better as a first step. Even if good data collection systems do exist, they often operate in isolation to each other, and therefore take significant effort to bring data together regularly to produce something meaningful or helpful beyond just an audit of where fuel might be going, what vehicles it might be going into. And in practice, it rarely happens, and even more rarely is it done consistently. Telematics usually exist in fleets to some extent, and there's often a positive statement of intent to say we're going to do driver monitoring, we're going to monitor fuel through telematics. But quite often, busy fleet and service managers, they're pressed to deal with the day-to-day, the incidents that are coming in, things that are happening, and they don't have the time to move this from use as a tracking and incident management device to something that helps the services proactively and helps the fleet across the organisation to be more efficient. So investment in these right efforts and software can integrate all the data sources and ensure that the right people in the organisation understand visibly and clearly how they need to contribute. So, for example, service managers are responsible for a section of vans of the fleet. They need to be visibly able to understand how their vans are performing. Otherwise, if it's not core to their job, it might get missed. So the right software is needed, and with this, it can all be drawn together and presented prominently through automated processes. And there's a lot to gain here if it's done well. Often in a fleet, on top of the differences due to the vehicle roles and routes, we find that the worst drivers use 40% or even more fuel than the best drivers. That's a lot of carbon emissions in relative terms. So taking a strategic approach and investing time and sufficiently senior resource to running what we have more efficiently is important. And that's because it's something we can do now to reduce the carbon we produce. It's something that can be done straight away. Cost savings also can be substantial. If you're burning 1 million litres of fuel and you're saving 10%, let's say, by having the drivers drive more efficiently, that's over £100,000 a year. So it's worth paying a member of staff to get this, to realise this. And of course, less fuel consumption not only means less cost, but it means less power will be needed in electric vehicles when you go forward with those too. Understanding this in detail will mean better investment decisions. So you'll understand where charge points can be shared and where cheaper vehicles with smaller batteries can be bought. And data will help clearly to understand what energy is being used, where battery and charging requirements come in, and help understand where less vehicles on a fleet may be needed or specifications changed. For example, do you really need so many big vans that cost a lot more to electrify? Could you get by with smaller vans? So with a good grasp of future energy requirements, sound decisions can be made and prioritised based on the actual energy requirements that's actually based on the current fleet consumptions. And remember, higher mileage vehicles will save more on fuel, so they're better to electrify for decarbonisation than low mileage vehicles. It's also important to note from the start that buying is needed at a senior level, and people must be engaged across the different areas of the organisation. So estates, energy managers, service managers. It goes beyond the scope of just the fleet manager in most organisations, and it needs planning to achieve at the right level of upfront investment, even if there's going to be cost savings further down the line. Where there is a net zero target and commitment working to achieve this, the fleet should be a stated priority, as it's usually a significant contributor to overall emissions. So currently, there are sufficiently long-range, whole-life cost-effective vehicles in the small and medium van sectors, as well as good options for refuse collection. Other sectors aren't far behind, but costs and specifications may need to evolve a little bit to deliver what is needed cost-effectively. And in some sectors, maybe 3.5-tonne vans, for example, deferring some of the replacements a little bit to enable the EV market to mature could be the best way to decarbonise quickest.
Thanks, James. What you've described there is lots of sort of movable pieces that need to be sort of coordinated together. A plan, a strategy is needed. Something that I noticed that you mentioned that Tammy had started to shape for us is the need for buy-in from senior managers, all the various stakeholders. I think that's a really, really useful piece for public sector fleets to remember. In terms of the challenges, I think it'd be remiss of us not to talk about infrastructure as a challenge. So, Aaron, we have talked about this a little bit earlier on. How can we try to minimise these challenges in terms of charging infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So I'll suggest four things to have in mind in this space, and the first one really segues on from James's point, is about, well, starting with a plan. So considering the mileage of your vehicles, if they return back to depots or go home with staff, consider whether those staff have off-street parking, in which case that they can probably get charge points at home. And you can consider longer term questions like your estates. So what sort of capacity do your estates have? Talk to the DNOs about the electrical capacity available. Maybe you're making some changes to your estates, and you could upgrade the infrastructure at the same time. So linking up internally and externally, both internally within your organisation, to understand the full needs of your organisation. As we've said earlier, it's really important to get buy-in and commitment within your organisation, and externally, other companies in the area, elsewhere within the local authority. As I said, your DNO relationship is crucial, and basically reviewing what public charging provision already exists in your area within your fleet. There's often a lot more publicly available infrastructure than you realise. So using tools like ZapMap to understand what's available already. Secondly, there's an awful lot of guidance and support out there already. The Transport Decarbonisation Plan committed to produce a range of decarbonisation toolkits for local authorities. We're working with the EST, so people like James, very closely to produce these toolkits, and they'll be published later this year. So they'll provide guidance on local authority fleet electrification, for example, and we'll get into vehicles and depot charging. We fund EST to produce fleet advice to local authorities and public bodies like the NHS on electrification. We're also working with the Institute of Engineering and Technology to produce an EV infrastructure guide for local authorities with a particular focus on on-street provision. So yeah, it's useful for any organisation who needs to raise capability around EV charging, and that will be published early next year. Thirdly, be aware of the funding opportunities, but both public and private. So we've got several schemes for different sectors, and they're all relevant. So today we have the electric vehicle home charge scheme that's relevant for those taking vehicles home with off-street parking. So again, thinking about your employees, making sure that they have charge points available. We have a workplace charging scheme to support staff parking and depot charging. Again, that's open to the public sector. For SMEs, we're reforming some of these schemes later this year, and we'll be providing additional support early in 2022 with a grant of up to £15,000 available per site for SMEs to provide charge points for their fleets or staff. So keep an eye out for future announcements in that space. And local authorities have the on-street residential charging scheme available to them. We have £20 million available just this year to address on-street charging. So that's an important resource for local authorities. But increasingly, as the sector is commercialising, the private sector is willing to invest more and more in this space. So we see an important role in public authorities in driving really strong commercial contracts and using government funding to top that up. So there's the market is moving quite quickly in this space. And finally, be aware of upcoming strategies, as they will help inform your outlook. So the government is soon to publish the public EV infrastructure strategy, and that will set out a vision for EV infrastructure with respect to meeting consumer needs and equity and so forth. It will set expectations for the roles and responsibilities for national and local government and industry stakeholders, and it will provide clarity on the advantages of different mixes of charging types for delivering the vision. So in summary, lots of support and funding is out there. You just need to look for it.
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. Thank you for that. I think many public sector sustainability and fleet managers might not be aware there is quite so much support out there, both commercially, financially, but also the advice part you spoke about as well, helping people guide themselves through the transition. Tammy, thinking about your involvement for a number of years now, helping those early adopters and those now looking to transition, are there any ways we can look at quick wins to support gaining momentum and buy-in for this decarbonisation?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And as Aaron mentioned there, making sure that you've got sight and access to that funding that's available is going to be key. And it's also been mentioned by James and Aaron and before about gaining the buy-in from the business to support that investment and policy change that's required is going to be key. and that'll really help gain that support and get the momentum going. There's a keen focus at the moment. I'm doing a lot of work on carbon reduction in general and the development of carbon reduction plans across organisations. So it is really important that your fleet and commercial teams are linked and engaged with those. Adding a bit more to what you pointed out at the beginning, Kim, and James has also mentioned it. In 2019, transportation was found to be the most polluting sector in the UK, contributing to about 27% of the nation's total greenhouse gas emissions. It's obviously not just public sector fleets that are responsible for this, but it does demonstrate how addressing the carbon footprint associated with fleet and transport can really start to make a success and gain momentum in those carbon reduction plans. Reviewing the travel and fleet policies to ensure they address carbon reduction considerations and initiatives is key. Really thinking about how you can move that forward. Exploring things such as the introduction of a zero emission vehicle salary sacrifice scheme. It's an effective approach, easy to implement, and can be cost neutral. It also reaches wider than just the business-related mileage and supports getting more electric vehicles visible on the roads and changing that mindset and culture of people's sort of perception of electric vehicles, which I think we've moved forward leaps and bounds with. Like with any change initiative, because that's what it is in these organisations as we're making those changes, communication is going to be key. It's really important to keep your employees well informed and aware of what you're trying to achieve. Share progress and successes along the way, but also make sure you're listening to concerns, giving them a voice. Go on the journey together and get everybody wanting to move in the same direction. We've touched on in the discussions, and James and Aaron have mentioned it, about operational vehicles can be a little bit more difficult, especially in terms of consideration for charging, because you may be operational all day and you need to come back to on-site charging, which can be more problematic for many of the reasons that have been mentioned. But looking at those employees that take the vehicles home-based charging's a lot easier. A lot of the lease packages that we see can include the provision of the charging infrastructure and a home-based charging kit with no benefit in kind taxations to the employees. So that's a good quick win to look at. And also, in terms of the operational vehicles, it's a good opportunity to review what vehicle specifications are required for the operational need. I think all too often we tend to replace like-for-like vehicles in terms of size and body type, and this leads many public sector fleets that I talk to a perception that there's not an EV suitable for them currently in the market. But this is not always the case. So I would say look at what's available and meets the needs that you want to deliver for your operational need. As has already been mentioned as well, over and over again, can't stress it enough, data is key, and it will support the ability to demonstrate the whole life cost and the carbon reduction benefits. I think consideration towards extending the replacement cycles for EVs also needs to be a key consideration and somewhere where more key benefits can be realised. I think it would be amiss for us not to mention, the vehicle supply chain issues that we're having at the moment. We know it's a challenging time for all, but maybe we can use this as an opportunity to really plan effectively our replacement pipelines, work with the supply market, secure build slots where you can, and plan in advance and be prepared. I think are some steps that everybody could start making now.
Thanks, Tammy. James, we've spoken a bit about that planning earlier on in this session and the strategy. But I know much of the work that EST and indeed yourself do is on a more practical level as well. So working quite closely with fleets to understand their current profiles and how they can make that switch. So thinking about what Tammy's told us, it might involve reimagining the specification for operational vehicles and sort of changing people's views. In your view, what are the biggest challenges the public sector faces in this?
Yeah, the challenges do vary from fleet to fleet, but there are quite often a lot of common themes. And one of these is the focus upon capital cost of the vehicle. Finances are often set up in a way that if you buy a vehicle and then it's cheaper to run, the budget that benefits from it being cheaper to run is not the same budget that the purchase is made from. So the capital costs can be quite a obstacle, and a fleet manager persuading the finance department that he needs 3 times as much to buy a vehicle, but it will pay back over the life of the vehicle, is quite often a big challenge. And making this work in practice can be a problem, because there does need to be more money raised up front if vehicles are being bought. It's a case of really getting the right people to understand and getting the finances to work. Buying an electric vehicle does quite often work financially, quite often saves money when whole life costs are taken into account. Of course, you've got no VED, you've got lower maintenance costs, there's a lot less moving parts on electric vehicles, and of course, the much reduced energy costs. These can be as little as a quarter of that for diesel. But again, this is at the expense of those headline figures that look uncomfortably high. Other challenges can be within the replacement cycles. So making it pay on a whole life cost basis, if you've got a short replacement cycle, doesn't always suit electric vehicles, especially if the vehicles aren't high mileage, if they're doing very low mileages. So these might be needed to be extended to make electric vehicles work financially. Battery warranties may well make this possible. Typically 8 years, 100,000 miles is what we've seen on a lot of vans and cars, and longer on some heavy goods vehicles. Longer replacement cycles do make the electric vehicle more viable, as long as it's longer for the savings to offset the capital costs. This might make some listeners uncomfortable. Things like bin lorries, for example, might need to have a scheduled floor and lift refurbishments if you're keeping them longer. And people may have had bad experiences running diesel bin lorries for 10 years. But with electric, there are a lot less moving parts. Things like gearboxes, exhausts, and emission control won't need replacing on an electric vehicle. Other challenges can be the structure of the organisation. Flexibility is really needed to help here, because when structures are siloed, good fleet management practices can be blocked. Sometimes vehicles are best pooled and shared between departments, but if the systems of an organisation doesn't allow that, you end up with lots of low mileage vehicles not giving good value for money. Whereas if you can share, if you've got a vehicle being used 2 days a week by one department and another vehicle in another department being used a couple of days a week, if you can have one vehicle across both departments, that's much more efficient. So that is quite a challenge, because there are a lot of embedded mindsets, lots of people who don't want to unload their van to lend it to another department or to share. So that can be a real challenge. But addressing this can really help you, because if you can run less vehicles, not only do you need less charge points, not only do you have more flexibility, but there's less embedded carbon in your fleet and a much better financial outcome. As with data, investment of sufficiently senior time and resources needed, that can be a challenge needed up front to make such big changes. It's beyond the scope quite often of the average fleet manager. The fleet manager perhaps isn't always able to get into those right places of the organisation to bring that kind of change. So getting that invest money to save money mindset is a huge challenge, and getting the senior people on board is probably one of the answers to that. But that can in itself be a challenge. So getting the communications right is quite important. And so also specifying your electric vehicles. It's been mentioned a few times. Tammy, you mentioned it. Getting that spec right still remains a challenge. In the 3.5 ton sector, there is still that payload versus volume versus range. That can be a compromise needed in some cases, but we are seeing better products. We're seeing vans in that with 4 tons now, giving you that extra payload. So you can get payload volume, and range is starting to come better in those bigger van sectors as well. Some sectors, you're challenged in as much as you can't order the vehicles yet. We see announcements for trucks, we see announcements for vehicles of certain types, but we can't always see them available to order because they're at that early stage. But we'll think things will change quite rapidly. When mileages are low as well, it's quite hard to get whole life costs to work. But again, going back to the previous point, if you can share use between departments, that will make that case much stronger. The other challenge, of course, which has been mentioned before as well, is ensuring that sufficient infrastructure is in place. in advance of the fleet updates. This can be a huge challenge if there's not spare electrical capacity within the site or depot. So it's really important to understand what capacity you've got within your site or depot where the vehicles are based, and if there is a lack. There's lots that can be done to improve this. This is good news, whether that's through smart charging, whether that's through on-site generation, or whether that's through using static batteries to balance the load. But large fleets will probably find this needs a lot of forethought and potentially some work and investment with the distribution network organisations. And that can be quite a challenge and it can take time. So my advice would be thinking about it now, so that you've got the infrastructure in place when you're ready to get the vehicles, rather than waiting and then finding that you can get the vehicles, but it's going to take a while to get the infrastructure in place. So yeah, lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities as well, Kim.
Okay, yeah, good bit of advice there on tackling infrastructure and making the most of support where you can. Some of the earlier points that you'd mentioned, they feel like the challenges and the opportunities for fleets regardless of the fuel type. So in optimisation, specifications, really the utilisation of the vehicles, getting the most out of them. I think that's going to resonate with fleet managers, transport organisers and commercial people, as I say, regardless of the fuel type. So it's just really good practice. Tammy, thinking about now Crown Commercial Service, what have we got to help the public sector in this?
Yeah, Kim, well, alongside the commercial agreements that we've got in place, obviously for both acquisition and the running of the vehicles, together with the charging infrastructure and also energy generation and supply, the fleet team have got a lot of experience and market insight, both commercial experience and fleet experience. And I think that this, together with the benefit of us being engaged across the whole of the public sector with a wide, diverse range of customers, means that we can really support with case studies, lessons learned, but we can also help start those discussions to maybe explore collaboration opportunities, be that for vehicle charging or actually the acquisition of the vehicles. I think one of the key things that's unique to what CCS has to offer is also our fleet portal. So this is a tool that supports our customers, doesn't just provide live competitive quoting for the purchase and the lease of vehicles, but it's also a platform to search and filter all of the vehicles that are available in the UK market against some key criteria. And that means that you can use those filters to identify those vehicles that are going to suit your needs. And it provides alongside that an awful lot of information which can really support with the wider whole life cost calculations and the building of your business cases. So that's something that we can offer that can really help with that transition. And I think lastly, and really importantly, is some of the key contacts that we have, across industry, trade bodies and government departments who are setting policy and releasing some of the funding. We work closely with EST and OZEV. And I think this insight means that we're really well positioned to support and offer that guidance with key commercial considerations together to support the customers to develop their strategy and aggregation opportunities in this space.
Yeah, and on that note, thanks, Tammy. I'm going to come back to you, Aaron, if that's okay. What would you say OZEV's key role is in supporting the public sector transition?
So that's a really interesting question, because I think it's changed over time. So OZEV has been around for over 10 years now. I think in the first instance, the main focus was on funding and stimulating a nascent industry. I think that's actually changed in recent years. So funding is still important, and there's significant funding committed throughout this SR period, so it's 24-25. But actually the market is really starting to take a lead. Costs coming down. They're often competitive with ICE vehicles now in many instances when you look at whole life costs. And as we mentioned earlier, public charging infrastructure is increasingly being supported through private sector investment. Most public infrastructure is actually funded through the private sector rather than public sector now. So more to be done on funding, but I think to successfully stimulate the industry. So I think OZEV's most important role these days is setting the strategy and the regulations to make sure that the whole transition can move as smoothly as possible. So obviously the 2030 phase-out date is probably the most important aspect, and securing that. And the government announced that it will introduce a ZEV mandate to secure that transition. So it's really providing market certainty, and it means that getting the buy-in from senior leaders is that much more straightforward now because it is very clearly government policy. And then a whole range of regulations to support the transition. So making sure that the consumer experience is as smooth as possible. So addressing issues like reliability of charge points, easy payment, data provision, so there's good public information, etc. Building regulations we're changing so that all new homes will have charge points, and linking up with colleagues in Ofgem to make sure that we have sufficient electricity, etc., to enable the transition. And then finally, guidance and support. We've mentioned that earlier. This is very new to a lot of people still. So I think that the role for OZEV in providing that guidance and support is also really key.
Thank you, Aaron. And thank you all for your insight that you shared today. I'm really feeling the enthusiasm and the positivity from each of you from your respective areas of expertise and experience. And I think this ambition for the public sector to play its role in the UK reaching carbon net zero is really achievable. You've each highlighted the strategic thinking and the plan that has been set out to lead us to this goal. And you've really been pretty honest addressing the challenges from the current really quite acute market situation in terms of supply and our approach in terms of charging infrastructure. But equally, you've demonstrated the progress that has already been made in vehicle research and development to date, and the commitment from the motor industry to speed things up where they can. I'm thinking that the key takeaway for me today is that the charging infrastructure is the complex part of the puzzle, and that's probably the best place for the public sector to make a start when tackling their transition to net zero. Finally, thank you all for listening today. To learn more about how CCS can help you on your carbon net zero journey, please visit crowncommercial.gov.uk/CNZ.